Well, well, welcome everybody. You're back with us for another Thursday where we're going to have a brainstorming about the human connection to figure out like how we're connected and how we could be connected, should be connected, have been connected. So there's all kinds of things to discuss. But I'm welcoming you today, and along with our unique guest, Susan Kroger. And I think you're going to find that she has a lot of interesting experience and insight into kind of something that we all struggle with at one time or another. Now is the holidays. We're having a lot of holidays. New Year's, Hanukkah, it's I think it is Hanukkah, right? Did I get that right? But anyway, everybody's having a holiday because it's the solstice, and the solstice is the longest night and the shortest day, and now everything turns around. And those kind of changes are they cause changes in us too. Our mood shifts. But you feel like a sunny day. You feel, even if things are not going all that well, they feel better than if it was a dark, cloudy, or foggy, wet, cold day. The sunny days, even if it's cold, the sunny day just kind of makes you feel better. So it means, to me, that signals that the external things in our lives, not only other people, but the weather, the temperature, what we ate, and all those things, they come into play in terms of what we're feeling and how we interact with other people. So this is a good time to talk about our emotional states, because if we're looking at the human condition, I don't think there's anything more important than our emotional states in terms of how we interact with each other. So welcome, Susan. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Good. I'm looking forward to this discussion. I think there's a lot we have to talk about. And if there's one thing we can say pretty much about everybody is they have some kind of emotional state at some point, so that's something we all have in common. We have experienced an emotional state,
Absolutely.
So let's start off, Susan. Now that we kind of have a quorum, people are here and have gathered. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us the Susan Kroger elevator speech.
Sure. I was going to make a joke and ask who wants to share first. So, hi, everyone. It's very nice to meet you all. My name is Susan Kroger. I live in Sioux Falls, but I grew up about 30 minutes outside of Sioux Falls in a small town called Inwood, Iowa. Grew up on a sheep farm. My parents still live there. And my parents have always been very involved in their community on various levels. They still are to this day. And so a desire to take care of my community was instilled from a very early age. And so most of my background's actually in mental health and nonprofit work as a result of that. So I have a master's degree in mental health counseling. After I received that degree, I came back to Sioux Falls from college, and I started work immediately in the field. So most of my work as a therapist has been with women and children. That work is my heart, and I've really enjoyed it. As I worked as a therapist, particularly with young single mothers, I did find some frustration around the idea of constantly pulling oneself up by their bootstraps. And so I very much wanted to better understand systems that impact people, and where we can intervene in those systems in order to make change. And so as a result, I went back to school again, and I'm finishing up my PhD in sociology from SDSU. And that experience has, I think, given me a really solid skill set in terms of understanding how data can inform programming, can inform processes for nonprofits, and can honestly help mental health. And so I am now the director of programs for an organization called Lost&Found. We are located in Sioux Falls. We're about 11 years old. We were founded by a group of students at USD who had lost a friend to suicide and wanted to understand how to better take care of students on campus. And so our director, Eric Mucky, was one of those founding members. And ever since then, we've been doing suicide prevention work with post-secondary institutions across the state. I have the good fortune of getting to do most of our operations. And so we have some very wonderful, robust programs I can tell you guys about. We have a research arm that really leans into data. And then we also do some work on policy. So that's a really short version, I guess, of how I got to where I am today.
Well, I think that's a wonderful condensed version of Susan Kroger. We know that you're a lot more than that, but we're gonna go on from there, and we're gonna discover, I think, other things about you as we engage in this conversation. As I mentioned at the top of the program, you know, Christmas is a time, or the Christmas season, this kind of season, somewhere between the 21st of December and the 21st of January, lots of changes happen with people, lots of different celebrations, and, you know, everything changes, so to speak, you know. And people experience different emotional states. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the kinds of experiences people are having or going through during these solstice season, let's call it that?
Right. Sure. So it's interesting because, you know, we're all told this is supposed to be the time of year when we're the happiest. We're surrounded by family and we get to celebrate the holidays, and it's supposed to be a wonderful, the most wonderful time of the year, right? However, you have so many issues right now. I think we have to discuss the current context to really understand how people are doing right now. So I know from my vantage point, working with college students, we have college students who are dealing with COVID still, who had to spend an entire academic year either doing work remotely or doing work in a very isolated way. And so we have students to some degree emerging from that, but not completely yet, trying to reintegrate into the world, try to reconnect with people, and trying to make sure they're successful in doing so. And I think that those difficulties, those pieces are things that everyone is dealing with. I mean, just anecdotally, I think about my own friends and family and how I see everyone struggling, really, without exception, myself included, right? I hear the word heavier. This holiday season feels heavier for folks. And the other word I've heard, particularly when I'm talking to college students, is lonely. So students are feeling really lonely, even sometimes when they're surrounded by people. And I think a lot of that has to do with just feeling overwhelmed, right? And so I think we're at a unique place right now of dealing with a global pandemic, and then also dealing with a time of year that's really difficult for people anyway. And so people are struggling. I get to work with campus counseling centers across the state, and I talk to campus counselors and center directors pretty regularly, and their wait lists are the longest they've ever been. Students are waiting a long time to get help, but the good thing, I guess, is that folks are also reaching out. I think more people are also reaching out for help than they have before, and there's less stigma around reaching out for help than there has been in the past.
Seems like a couple of things come to mind. One, if more people are having the experience, it seems like you don't feel as lonely in that experience as you would, because you see other people struggling with it too. So to some degree, that experience becomes more, let's say, conversational. You can talk about it more.
Right.
Because
Or
most
almost,
people more people are exhibiting that.
Right. Or almost, yeah, communal, like it's a shared human experience to struggle right now. I think
Yes.
that the part that's hard about it is that very few people have the capacity to allow others to lean on them. So the people you would normally have gone to for support don't have capacity themselves. And so where do you go? Where do you turn? And
Well,
so yeah, we see a
the
lot of
other
people
thing,
turning to professionals.
well, and the other thing that comes to mind as you were talking about that is many people have a circle of friends. That becomes their comfort zone. They don't talk to many other people, at least other than hi and goodbye. That's the place they've learned to, with those people, they know how to deal with their stress levels, et cetera. But then when those people are not available, as you were mentioning, where do they go and what's their ability to form new relationships, especially if some of those people, they lose to the COVID, then they're not there ever anymore, or they go away, or they become homeless. And so now you lost them. I mean, there's all kinds of stories in this. Can you talk a little bit about people's ability, uh, their ability to respond to or recover from loneliness? What kinds of things are you helping them with to deal with the loneliness?
Yeah. So I really, at my very core, I'm a humanist and believe that people do the best they can in the circumstances they're given and with what they have. And people are also extraordinarily resilient. It's pretty amazing that if if you're able to help give people tools and what they can do with those tools. And so one program I guess I'm really excited about that we've started at Lost and Found is a peer-to-peer mentoring program. And so this program it's been a long time coming. We started developing this program about 4 years ago. And we did a lot of work with SDSU on developing a program that could really help support the students who we call them at risk, but really students who are struggling with loneliness, maybe students who need a little extra support coming out of high school, students who are maybe struggling a bit academically or socially. And wanting to catch them before they're in crisis. So really thinking upstream prevention, how can we help students where they're at and meet them where they're at? And so what this program does is match those students who we usually identify through residential life, and it matches them with an older mentor student. Most of those mentors are going through helping services, major psychology, social work, that sort of thing, and are wanting to gain basic skills in how to mentor people and be with people. And so they're matched then with that student, and they have some pretty intense training they go to related to mental health, just because we want to make sure students are safe on both sides, and then meet with that student throughout the semester. So we're 2 semesters into this program. We are, sorry, my cat's very distracting. We are well on our way at both SDSU and USD and getting ready to expand the program. So far, what we're hearing from the mentees, which again, I wasn't surprised by, is my mentor helped me feel less alone. It wasn't like, oh, my mentor helped me study or gave me study skills or coping skills. It was, I felt less alone because I had someone who cared about me. And that can make all the difference for people, youth and other folks alike. And so that's probably the one piece I'm most excited about, and hoping to expand in the future.
Now, so as you mentioned that, it occurs to me that there's something maybe all of us can do, especially when you mentioned before that there are a lot of people who either lack capacity, never had the capacity, or they have reduced capacity to be leaned on. But those of us who do have some capacity to be leaned on, what can we do? I mean, what kind of things can we do for people?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds trite, but I think it's checking on people you love. I really think that's what it is, apart from finding some sort of formal mentoring program. But it's really checking on people you love. And I guess speaking from my own experience, checking on the helpers. So checking on those people who do tend to take care of everyone in their life, maybe who are in a helping profession that's really under strain right now, and just making sure they're okay. Not waiting for people to reach out to you, but reaching out to them if you have the capacity. I know for myself means a lot when my friends say, "Hey, Susan, no one ever checks on you. How are you?" It's a really big deal. It's really meaningful for me when folks do that. So I honestly think that's the single most important thing.
Well, okay, so when you say check on people, I'm one of these kind of people that often something everybody else understands, I don't get. So I don't really know what that means when somebody says, well, check on this person. Just call them and say, hey, you're still there? You got a pulse? Okay, so yeah. Or what else? What else do they? What do you do? What do you say? How do you approach that?
Sure. So I think a really good question is, are you okay? Or going even a step further to like, what's stressing you right now? Like just assuming that the person is probably struggling a bit and just going for that question. Giving them space to talk about what they need to talk about. I am a firm believer in the practice of silence in listening and not attempting to fill space, but really asking an open-ended question and then just allowing space for the person to fill it and to share what they need to share.
Yeah. So, and I really appreciate that you brought that up, because I'm one of those kind of people who, if I see a hole, I'm a white space phobic. So if I see a hole, I feel I have to feel it all the time. And that happens when, you want to help somebody. They say, I got this problem. You say, let me look through my Rolodex here. Here's your solution here. Take that. That's not what they really want. So, and it's taken me over 70 years to even just like think, what? You mean you have a problem and you don't really want to solve it? I understand that intellectual, but I have to say, in my gut, I have no idea what that means. So maybe there might be somebody else who has that same mental illness. So can you talk a little bit about, the value of just listening?
Yeah, I think it's so funny. So we do, as part of our mentor program, we do, like I said, pretty extensive training with our mentors, and the skills that we talk about in that training and we practice in that training are things that when you talk about them, they seem like, all I need to know I learned in kindergarten type skills, but they're not. They're really hard in practice and they require practice to do well. So things like asking open-ended questions, like when's the last time you thought about, okay, how do I say this in a question that is not going to result in a yes or no answer? And really thinking about that. When's the last time you practiced just being quiet and quieting your mind when someone was talking to you in order to really absorb what it is they're saying? When's the last time, so active listening skills, right? When's the last time you thought about how you set boundaries and whether or not you do that well in your own life and with others? Like basic skills that help us all be good humans that are, I can say as a almost 41-year-old that I'm still learning every day as well.
But, as you say that, I can remember almost, maybe not to the day, but I certainly around the time when I started really trying to answer people's problems. Because up until my early mid-20s, if I talked to someone, I just kind of listened to them, and then people say, man, he's creepy. He never says anything, he's just looking at you. And I'm reading them, yeah, I'm seeing that. So it just seems like there's some kind of balance in there that one has to find. Could you talk a little bit about that? Or maybe that's not a thing, I don't know.
No, I think it's interesting. So one thing I like to talk to the students about, the secret superpower, is just the idea of reflecting. So if someone's sharing a story with you, it's important, if you're, working on active listening, to communicate to them that you know what they've said and that you're hearing them. And so it's amazing what just saying the same thing back to the person in different words will do, right? That usually opens more doors and allows for more communication and sharing, and often more vulnerability as well. And so I think you're right. There's an art to it that takes time to learn, and it takes practice.
One of the things that happens with loneliness is that if it's experienced for a while, it can go into depression. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of depression? Not necessarily only from that angle, but that's one of the angles I've seen people deteriorate from is loneliness. Can you talk about depression?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many ways to talk about depression. So, I was just looking up recent stats. So incidence of depression has quadrupled, reported depression anyway, has quadrupled in the US in the past 10 years. It's increased substantially in South Dakota as well, diagnoses of depression. So we know that this is something that if people aren't experiencing more, they're at least talking about more, and they're at least seeking help for more often. But anxiety, I think both anxiety and depression can be really insidious, right? They start small. And you see this with COVID too. And I've seen this with the students I work with, where no, it's fine. These are just small adjustments I need to make. I'm doing this work from my home, from my parents' home now. I'm not going to be living on campus. It's a small adjustment. Everything will be fine. But the small adjustments quickly snowball into big ones, and to big life changes, especially again, giving our context. And those changes impact people. A lot of people really struggle with change, myself included. And so I think that's what I've seen a lot of is folks feeling depressed and not just feeling depressed, but oftentimes experiencing depression because of all of those changes, both in their life, regarding work, regarding friendships, regarding play, and then also just at home. There's strain on relationships as well.
Mhm. So if we're feeling lonely, depressed, it's one thing, and it's important to talk about what we can do for others, but what do we do for ourselves when we're feeling lonely and or depressed?
So that's a good question. And, it depends on the person. I think one thing again, going back to teaching the students, if a person is feeling actively suicidal, I absolutely urge them to reach out. If they have a therapist, reach out to that therapist. If they're in crisis, to call the suicide prevention line, 1-800-273-TALK. Definitely utilize that. I used to work with the helpline center, and I used to help answer some of those calls. And those folks are absolutely ready and willing to talk to you at any moment. And I always keep that number in mind too when I'm talking to other folks. Beyond that, if you're struggling with feelings of depression, struggling with feelings of loneliness, or if you've been diagnosed with an anxiety or depressive disorder, I think that there are a lot of things you do. So, seek out a therapist. I think that's one of the best things I've ever done for myself anyway, is to make the choice to go to therapy and to participate in therapy in order to make my life better. If you have been prescribed medications, psychotropic meds, make sure you're taking those meds, making sure you're taking care of yourself medically. Beyond that, I also encourage students to think about coping skills, which is, kind of like a buzz phrase, but it really is helpful when you think about both, I think, process coping skills. So thinking through, how do I reach out to folks to talk to them about what I'm struggling with? Who in my life is a safe person I can talk to about my struggles? And then also just things you can do to care for yourself. So for me, it's like bubble baths, or going on a walk, or journaling, that sort of thing, right? Where it's something that will bring you some sense of peace and joy, and you can do for yourself in the moment.
You bring up some really interesting and points that I think should be underscored, and especially with self-care, because a lot of times people don't know what they need to do to take care of themselves. And a lot of times the things that they need, they've been made to feel ashamed of them. Now, sometimes those self-medication things, that has untoward consequences, you know. So I'm certainly not advocating that. But at the same time, I think there's something to be said about taking a walk, you know, and that's the kind of thing that just, even on a cold day, it's amazing how taking a walk, the Japanese call it forest bathing, where you just take a walk in the trees, in nature, and magically you feel better. You know, it's a form of therapy that is reliable, you know, and cheap, you know, because that's the thing is when people say, "Oh, go see your therapist," and how am I supposed to pay for that again? You know, so that those are, or how am I even supposed to approach getting a therapist? I've never been to a therapist. I don't know what therapists do. I've never known anyone who was helped by a therapist. So I'm not feeling like therapy is a thing for me. You know what I mean? So it's like, how do people get past that first rung, or have you encountered people having that difficulty?
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. I think I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about also our rural context and the suicide epidemic we've seen amongst young men in rural spaces across the country, and here in South Dakota, it's no exception. Um, and that conversation can be really hard. You know, I grew up in a home where reaching out for help was seen as weakness, not as strength. And so really having to reframe that narrative, and to sometimes have to do it really quickly with folks who are in crisis is really hard. And so I don't know if there's a, you know, a magic wand solution for that. I think it involves a lot of sometimes tough conversations. And at the end of the day, it involves, I think, people willing to grapple with that within themselves and make a decision on their own.
Well, we're going to keep looking, and I'm going to open it up to our other panelists. Any of you have any kind of questions / comments for Susan?
Looks like Betty had a question. What are some ways to identify depression in yourself and others?
Yeah. So so the DSM is the manual that I know all therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists use to kind of diagnose different issues. But generally speaking, with depression, I honestly, even when I'm thinking about it with myself, I think about, how am I sleeping? Am I sleeping well? Am I sleeping too much or more than I normally do? Am I sleeping significantly less than I normally do? Also, how am I eating? Am I struggling with appetite, or am I using food as a means to cope with feelings? And then beyond that, intense feelings of loneliness, of sadness, of melancholy. So just persistent feelings of sadness that really won't go away. Feelings of hopelessness about the future, and about one's own life. Those are, to me, the big pieces I look for when I'm talking to a person, or when I'm, you know, thinking about how I'm doing myself. If the answer to all of those is yep, like things aren't like they normally are for me, or I'm struggling, that's when it's time to reach out for help, which can start with something as small as calling a friend, or you can go as far as searching for a counselor to talk to, and or calling the helpline to get some support.
So give us that helpline number again, or can somebody put it in the chat for people too?
Yeah, actually it's 211 is statewide now. So you can actually call, if you're in South Dakota, you could call 211. They're the same number that answers the suicide prevention number for the state of South Dakota, but they also are able to connect you. If you're looking for a therapist, they can connect you anywhere across the state with a therapist.
Okay, good, good. Anyone else? Questions, comments?
I
Charles?
have a question, Lawrence. I
Yeah.
suppose we've all known people who have attempted suicide. Some of us have known people who have committed suicide. I suppose in the latter case, especially, that's a lifelong frustration and exploration. So what have you learned about suicide through your many years of experience? What might you say about that? How do you now understand suicidal impulses better than you did before all of the experiences that you've had?
That's a really good question. I think that, so again, I feel like I have to say that most of my experience is working with young people who have had feelings of suicide or have completed suicide. And I do believe that there's maybe a difference there with young folks who are feeling hopeless about the future and about their lives. I think I've learned, again, this might sound cliche, I've learned that talking to parents who have lost, their children to suicide, talking to friends, that oftentimes it felt as though it wasn't about wanting to die as much as it was about wanting to end the pain, and that wanting to understand how to end pain, or wanting to just desperately escape from the pain they were feeling was so intense that they were willing to do anything in order to do that, to escape it. And so it's so often so much more a conversation about pain than it is about ending life. And how can we end that pain? How can we talk about ways to end that pain? How can we help you feel supported to end that pain? And that when I've been able to reframe the conversation that way, that it becomes a different conversation. And yeah, it maybe reframes the idea of hope too, that pain isn't forever. There are things you can do about pain. So that's a really good question and hard to answer.
Yeah, but well, I think you added some very interesting points about hopelessness and the attempt to escape from pain, because most of us don't like pain. It's almost by definition, it's something we don't like. Most of us have, when we run out of solutions, we can feel hopelessness, and that's a certain kind of pain. It's like you can't breathe. So it points out how difficult it is for us. I'm looking for more resources because I'm kind of a resource guy. It's like, especially things that people can do before they actually spin off the rail, or before it gets really bad where, like it changes the way the neurons talk to each other in the head. Can you talk a little bit about some of the strategies that you've found that people, when they're just feeling bad, where do they go for solutions? How do they ask for help?
Sure. So I could follow up if it's helpful with an entire resource list for potential places to go online for folks. I think that there are a few good sites to go to. Again, I can't recommend Helpline Center enough. They have resources related to mental health, but also their website has resources related to several different types of social struggles, and you can actually search by area. I also think you, again, searching for someone to talk to online is really important. There are mental health, there's NAMI here in South Dakota. There are other organizations that do work specifically related to mental health. If you are a college student or you know of a college student who's struggling, I'm happy to leave my email address so people can reach out to me. We can get them connected to our programs. But there are definitely programs that exist out there to help folks who are struggling. But thanks, Ryan. He's putting up some websites for me. But I'm happy to follow up with more specific resources.
Great. Betty, you look like you were going to ask a question before.
I think Charles's question was much more profound than mine was going to be. I was going to follow up with my other question about how to recognize depression and thinking in terms of how it feels internally to be depressed. So I'm open to comments on that. It's just a
So thinking about how it feels to be depressed or how it feels internally to be depressed. I don't know. I almost suspect that several people on this call could help answer this question. I know for myself, it feels like a really, really heavy weighted blanket. Oftentimes it feels like I can't necessarily get off the couch or things that are really normal things I should be able to do, like get up and cook lunch or get up and take a shower, or things that feel absolutely impossible to me. The thought of, I like to think of myself as a fairly gregarious person, and the thought of interacting with folks is awful and the last thing I want to do when I'm depressed. So I'm very much wanting to isolate and really crawl under a blanket and watch Netflix for 3 weeks. But that's, I know for myself, that's often how it feels internally, but I'd honestly be curious to see if anyone else has any thoughts there.
Well, this is Kevin. I think in myself, when I go beyond just feeling down to feeling real depression, a walk in the woods doesn't do anything for me. Going fishing, which I love and which can elevate me, or going hunting or hiking, I can go out there and feel dead to all that. I can walk through the woods, I can go through the rhythm of fishing, and it doesn't do for me what it always has done for me in my life. And that's not just frustrating, but it's scary when you feel that the things that used to help you work your way out of these situations feel dead. And I think that's when counseling and medicine is essential, and friends.
Yeah, and you bring up a very important point, Kevin, and that is, there's a point at which it's really harder to recover. It's just like any other kind of balance. You can be a little bit off balance, a little bit this way, that way, but once you get sort of a certain point, then you fall over, or you're going to need help from somebody else. You're going to have to reach out and hold something. Somebody's going to have to like steady you or something like that. That's why people have canes, is so you don't overreach that point of balance. So I think that's another thing that's important to say, is like, don't wait till there's a crisis, don't wait till the roof is burning to put out the fire.
Yeah. And sometimes it sneaks up on you.
Oh yeah.
You have a great day or a great week and you think, okay, now everything's okay. And suddenly you get up and it's all back and you don't know why.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit to riff on that a little bit? Can anyone talk a little bit about the role of nutrition in depression? Anyway.
If I eat better, I tend to feel better. But in my case, nutrition has never been a strong enough factor to carry me through a real depression or a real anxiety, because I struggle with both.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good point is, again, like there's no magical answer to any of this, right? There's no one thing, taking a walk in nature isn't going to instantly help you to feel better, just like eating all your fruits and vegetables isn't going to help you to feel better. However, there's also research showing that doing those things consistently is going to help boost your mood, right? And so there is, I think, this interesting balance of how to care for yourself, or how to care for oneself over time, but then also like how do you care for yourself in a crisis? And those are two different things.
Yes.
And I think that is a very important point to make. But yeah, I mean, there is, I'm not a dietitian, but there's research showing links between eating well and mood. But it's only one piece of a really large puzzle.
Yes. But all of those pieces are important. Sometimes we have a culture that often looks to like single source solutions. We want like one pill that cures a cold and cancer. We don't want like this one is for cancer, this one's for cold. Well, why can't I just have one thing? So whatever I feel, that's not right, it will also pump up a flat tire. If you take this, suddenly your tire will, or something like that. So I think it is multifaceted, and that's sometimes why we can feel hopeless, because okay, if it's one thing, I just do that one thing. It's like cooking. If it's 2 ingredients, I can handle it. If it's 5, I can't cook that. I can, but there are people who feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had a question just about generational. You talked about sort of mindsets that we grow up with and how that shapes how we are resilient or how we think about dealing with things. Is there a generational difference too that you've seen from older folks to younger folks, or kind of where the splits are there for how people think about mental health and what they're willing to do or talk about?
It's a good question, Jeremy, my boyfriend. So yeah, I mean, I've seen differences over generations. I mean, I think that there are stereotypes associated with generations according to that, right? So everyone's like, oh, millennials are more than happy to reach out for help. That's not an issue for them. If anything, they reach out for help for absolutely everything, which I take offense to as a millennial. But there is, I think there is a reduction of stigma generally over time, where you've seen more and more people reach out for help, more and more people admit vulnerability, and admit that maybe they can't do everything on their own, and that maybe we're not meant to do everything on our own, and that they need to reach out to other folks. And so I know I see with my Gen Z college students right now that therapy is really not a dirty word. Most of them are more than happy to talk about it very openly. Most of them are very happy to seek out therapy, and they have no qualms about it. I think that is, part of why we are seeing such long waiting lists at counseling centers across the state. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. People are reaching out for help when they need it. And so I'm hoping that there's reverberating impact of that when we see people in our lives, even if it's our own children, or even if it's our students, reach out for help and admit that they need help, that maybe that opens the door and allows permission for other people to do the same. And so I think it's kind of a cool thing that we're seeing that way.
South Dakota, how do we stack up against other demographics in other states?
Oofda, that's a loaded question. So it kind of depends on what we're talking about.
Sure.
There is obviously a suicide epidemic amongst the Native American population in South Dakota that goes, I think, largely untalked about. There's so much work to be done. And there is a lot of good work being done. I've had the good fortune of working with several organizations on the Rosebud Reservation, doing really wonderful, innovative, community-based suicide prevention work. So there's good stuff happening. That being said, there's a lot, I think, that can be done. We have a provider shortage in South Dakota that is, it's seen across the country, but it is acute in South Dakota, I'll say. We have a really hard time we have lots of counseling programs. We have a social work program now. We have, psych program at USD. We have a really hard time keeping those folks in South Dakota once they graduate. We don't pay them enough. There aren't enough opportunities. We could go on and on and on about workforce. So that's an issue. We do have, and in terms of our rates of, maybe depression or suicide, I think we probably fall somewhere in the middle. But there's a lot that can be done, I think, in terms of programming and also policy to make sure that we're keeping people safe here.
Mhm. Well, that's, keeping people safe that's an important thing to do. At the same time, I think, how do we strengthen, how can I say, connections, the human connections? Because I think, we started out talking about loneliness, and I would gather that loneliness is one of the ingredients to depression and other kinds of mental illnesses, just like people are disconnected. What are some ways that we can, that people can go about being more connected and feeling more connected with others? And maybe you could talk about some of the obstacles too.
That's a huge question. So, it goes so far beyond mental health and suicide prevention, right? I mean, personally, so part of my PhD program, I studied social movements on social media and the use of social media within social movements. And there's so much there about human connection too, and how we connect on social media now, and what that connection looks like, and the depth and the anonymity and how that changes how we behave as humans, right? And also, we could talk about that for another hour, but also social media is a very integral part of our reality now, and it's not going away anytime soon, right? So it's easy to say, well, people just need to reach out to others in person and meet face to face and look into each other's eyes. That's really easy to say, but that's not a reality for a lot of folks.
And it's worth noting that before there was even the internet, people weren't doing a whole bunch of that,
Right. Yeah. So again, it's, I think it's so depends on what connection means to you. For me, it's, so I get so much connection out of my few close friends who I call my pillars, and reaching out to them when I need to talk, or making sure I have regular time scheduled with them. It's spending time with my kids on the couch, just doing word searches, and doing something that is, kind of mindless, but something easy that we can just experience physical closeness. I think it really, and for other people, I have an aunt who really, really likes her quilting Facebook group and gets a lot of connection out of that and a lot of feelings of camaraderie. And so it really, I think, depends on the person.
Yes, and I understand it depends on the person. And I'm going to throw this question out then to some of the other panel members. What can you suggest as a way to get people more connected? Because as you say, it's not, after it gets so far, then maybe it's harder to connect. But how do we not get there? How do we, before it, or at least take care of the people who will end up in crisis before they get into crisis? Those are already in crisis. Susan's going to have to take care of them. But the people before they get into crisis, so that she doesn't have more people who can't get in because there's no space. What are the kind of things that we might be able to do to help each other feel more connected? Any ideas? Is everybody disconnected?
Well, I can say a few things about what I'm doing here in Aberdeen. Primarily, I'm keeping myself as safe as I know how, because if I die of COVID, my son's going to kill me. So I have to be careful. And I'm learning and enjoying being solitary and an introvert. But we have a wonderful resource here and perhaps many other places in South Dakota, and that's the Red Rooster Coffee House. It's perhaps the most inclusive place I've ever really experienced, and all you have to do is walk in the door. Many people of all sorts and needs and conditions and gifts walk in there and spend time there. So it's the kind of place where a person who's even partway open to connection might be sitting, reading, or just watching the other folk. And I have made some very nice connections there that work both ways. So something like that, whether it's a church group or a school group or start a group. We started an art group in Aberdeen, and that serves a lot of that same purpose. Sometimes we have to meet via Zoom, but I like that. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. So that's my contribution to one way or two or three to do that. It works for me quite often.
Anyone else?
Well, one of the things that a bunch of us old guys, I'm 70, have done during the pandemic was we try to make a regular meeting outdoors when the weather was nice, just to sit around a coffee or a picnic table in a park and talk. And that was extremely valuable for especially before the vaccines, when we were really holed up. Although we seem to be heading in that direction again. But those kinds of gatherings I know were essential for me during the first year or so of the pandemic, and may become that way again.
You make a really good point, Kevin. And that is, we can use what we have to get what we want, and we don't have to let perfect be the enemy of good. It's like if there's a sunny day and you're sitting outside, you're probably better and have more COVID protection than sitting in your house, especially if you live with other people. So a lot of times people say, well, I can't meet anybody. There's, COVID. No, yes, you can. You can go to a place where their air is rare, it's like, and especially when there's sunlight, because the UV is going to pretty much kill them on contact. So, there are ways that we can still get out. But I have a feeling that the real problem is that we don't know how to reach out, even when we know we do. I can remember being in junior high school where one of the things we practiced as young boys was something people refer to as pickup lines. It's like, well, what's the first thing you say to the girl? It's like, okay, well, it's like just to open the conversation, just to notice, there's some things you clearly don't work, so we can mark those off the list, but what things do work? And I think that's kind of where we're right now. We are told lots of ways how we shouldn't interact with people, what we shouldn't say to women, what we shouldn't say to people from other cultures, what we shouldn't say to people in other religions, but we don't say what it is that you do say. That's okay. What's the thing that if you open with that line, it's, other than nice day, isn't it? No, it's not. So then what? So I'm looking for does anybody else have any ideas of how one like even opens a conversation with a new person or even someone that you're reaching out to? How do you do that?
I don't know that it necessarily begins with trying to engage in conversation with people. I think if each of us could commit to being unfailingly kind in all our actions throughout the day, and that takes some doing, it would go a long way toward comforting others. Even during the quarantining, we have these opportunities, don't we? Where we can just exchange pleasantries, thank you, you're welcome, how are you, fine, kind of thing. And really say in our tone of voice and in our attitude of being, I'm interested in what you have to say. It's good to see you. I think that's very comforting to people, especially the lonely. And I think we tend to be dismissive sometimes of the people we meet routinely. And we don't take the time to be good to them. It doesn't take a lot more effort to do that. I think it would have an effect, maybe especially now with all of the concerns we have and all the polarization we have. No matter what, I'm going to be nice to this person. You know, I'm going to say something that lets her or him know that I care. I see him or her as another human being. So I don't know. Everybody's New Year's resolution. And maybe you all already do that. I don't know. But I wish more people would.
Yeah. Along those same lines, one of the simple things to do is to find something to compliment the random person for, you know, and, you know, I as an example, sometimes I'll see people who have, like, let's say, a different hairdo, you know, and often people do that to be, you know, just say, hey, I'm me, I'm searching for my identity. But there's pushback too that people often get, like, ugh, you know, what's that, you know? So I like to compliment people on their hairdos, especially when they're wild, you know, and I'll say something like, I'm going to grow my hair out so I can get that, you know, it's because that looks good, you know. But they recognize that it's a joke, but it's also complimentary, and it's one that at least it works most of the time, you know. Otherwise they pretend they don't hear me, you know. But hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained, you know. I'm willing to risk, and I think that's an important thing about reaching out to people is we have to be willing to risk. Well, we're coming up on the end of our hour here. Are there any closing things that you would like to leave us with, Susan?
Oh, I thank you so much for having me here today. This was a really wonderful, rich conversation. It's so different from what I usually get to do. So I really appreciate you having me, and it's very nice meeting all of you. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.
Okay. Anyone else have any things that they wanted to say but didn't or should have? Because in a couple of minutes you're going to be feeling guilty, you know. Anybody else? Well, if there's nobody else has anything to say, anything to add, I will just add myself that it's, you know, we all have to take care of each other. It's just like tent poles, you know, like by themselves, you just stand one up, it's going to fall over. But if they all lean on each other, you can put a lot of, you know, you can put a lot of weight on them, you know, and the more there are that's leaning on each other, especially when they're bound by each other, the more weight they can carry, the more they can be useful. So along with what Charles was suggesting, you know, let's all try to do something. This is a whole, you know, we're coming up to start a whole new year, that solstice thing, we're getting more sunshine every day. Spread some of that sunshine around, you know, so that we can help others, because helping others is helping ourselves. We often say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I would say do unto others because it is doing unto you. You know, you can't do to or for someone without doing to or for yourself. With that, we'll see you guys next week, same time, same station. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.